Hi, this is part 3 of the looping background lesson, and I wanted to show you a little flaw that I ended up with for mine. And let me click on the play button there. And what you'll see is that there's a seam that I didn't match up my second copy of the foreground completely. It's a little white seam there right in front of the mailbox. So I'm going to show you how I'll fix that. And also, since it looked like the background, the buildings there in the background, were moving along pretty fast, and it probably should be a lot slower in order to create a better illusion of depth. So here in my project file, I can see that I didn't quite match up the front and back end of that sidewalk there for the sidewalk group. So all I need to do is just go and look inside the sidewalk group here and click on sidewalk 2. Be sure I'm on frame 0, and maybe I'll zoom way in, and then with transform layer and shift key down, I'll just slide that over and close up that white gap. All right, so that'll look better. And then the other thing was perhaps trying to slow down the buildings. So I'll click over here on the buildings group, and the buildings were looping at 312. So I'll just simply get rid of that and make sure that I get rid of any other keyframes there. So basically, starting from scratch again, I'll go to frame 1 and animation, add keyframe, say no, and then I'll go over here and try something like frame 576. So again, I'll have to use my buildings reference, right? So I'll turn that back on, and then with transform layer and holding the shift key down, I'll just go through that same process, and let me zoom in so that I can make sure I'm going to match up using that different colored sidewalk as a reference, as a point of reference, right? And then I can turn off the buildings reference again, and of course set this for cycling and choose relative. Change this to 1 frame less. So instead of 575 now, I'll use 574 and close that. Don't forget to go back if you make any adjustments there, back to the frame 1 and choose linear, or it won't loop and look good. Now let me show you another way that you could also make that kind of adjustment. Let's say we wanted the street to go a little bit more slowly too. So I'm going to move over here to the street group now, and I'll select that. And the street group is stopped at 192. Let's say I dragged this back to 240 instead. But now what you'll see is that this moved also, and that's not good. It needs to be able to loop back to frame 2. So you can just right mouse button click over here on this end of it, choose cycle, and you just need to change this to be the difference of instead of a total of 240 frames, we'll go to 238. Okay, and then I'll hit enter, and then I can check and make sure that I got that right by looking back here, right? So I want that tiny little arrow pointing down to be on over frame 2. So then that should loop just fine. So that's another way to make that adjustment. And now let's look at the rendered sample. So I think you can tell that the buildings are probably moving along a little bit more slowly. I could even adjust that more if I wanted to. And the foreground's moving along quite quickly. So if you could imagine that there's a character in front of that mailbox and that fire hydrant walking along or running along, then they can stay still while the background is what's moving. So it'll give the illusion that the character is actually the thing that's moving and not the background. Okay, so that's the process. That's how you go about creating a background that's looping. You could have a couple of different levels, or you could have more than 3. And the reference layers are there to help you so that you can line up that second copy and then the looping will look smooth. Okay. Afterwards, if you wanted to, you could delete the reference parts out of the project file, or you can just leave them in there with the eyeballs unchecked. And that way, if you ever needed to go back and maybe use it over again, but change the speed of the way things are moving, you'd still have those reference layers in there, and that'd be great. So that's it. Let me know if you have any questions.